Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with me, Charlie Stayt, here in Downing Street, and Naga Munchetty in the studio. Our headlines today. More government resignations. A record 46 have now quit, but Boris Johnson remains defiant, ignoring calls from senior ministers to go. He sacks Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, a Downing Street source calling him a snake. In another sign of the Prime Minister's shattered authority, the Attorney General Suella Braverman declares her interest in becoming the Prime Minister. So what will today bring for the Prime Minister? We'll be speaking to key players across the political spectrum this morning, keeping you up to date with the very latest.
170 miles from Westminster, are voters even watching? I'm in Lee in Greater Manchester, one of the seats that swung from Labour in 2019, asking voters, would you still back Boris Johnson?
Good morning. Holidaymakers face yet more disruption. British Airways cuts more than 10,000 short-haul flights between August and the end of October. And we'll get up close and personal with the dress the Queen wore on the day of her coronation. It goes on display at Windsor Castle.
Good morning from Southampton, where Northern Ireland's women make their first ever appearance in a major tournament tonight. And the Euro.
But England players know that tournament football is not about how you start and everything about how you finish. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Old Trafford.
And so, yes, attention now turns to Norway and Northern Ireland live on the BBC tonight. Back to you, Naga.
Mike, thanks so much. I'm going to take you back to Downing Street, where Charlie is. Rather bizarre few minutes. So you'll remember that Nadhim Zahawi was appointed Chancellor. He wrote a letter. Charlie was talking to you about that just a moment ago. He was appointed Chancellor yesterday. And Michelle Donnellan was appointed Secretary for Education. We've just had a resignation letter, or just seen the resignation letter from Michelle Donnellan. Let's talk to Charlie, who's in Downing Street, getting analysis. Charlie, it's just twisting and turning. Michelle Donnellan, of course, Department of Education, she has said, whilst I remain very worried about the prospect of no ministers in the department as we approach results day, I pleaded with you to do the right thing, resign for the sake of our country and our party. Both are more important than any one person. You've put us in an impossible situation. Charlie, one of the things you've been talking about as well is the prospect of ministers going, and I'll make clear Nadhim Zahawi hasn't, ministers going, who's going to be doing the jobs that need to be done?
Yes, I mean, there's a number of things, isn't there, to address this morning. Number one, and it's worth stating this time and time again, Boris Johnson is still the Prime Minister. He is still inside number 10 Downing Street as we speak. But the extraordinary goings-on outside, and as you, I mean, in some ways it illustrates so clearly how extreme this situation is, where we have Nadhim Zahawi, who was only just appointed Chancellor and was talking about his support for the Prime Minister this morning, not resigning, but calling for the Prime Minister to go. Michelle Donnellan as well. She also a new appointment. She too has resigned. Standing with me here throughout the morning this morning, Nick Early. And Nick, we didn't know how this morning was going to pan out, but there is a sense now, and you tell me, as if this place, with Boris Johnson inside, is almost under siege now, as minister after minister resigns, alongside toxic comments about what is happening and what's been done.
It's all but officially game over now for the Prime Minister. Two ministers that he brought into new jobs less than 48 hours ago have now changed their minds about his leadership. There is, I don't think, any way that this damage can now be repaired by Boris Johnson. He has a colossal hill to climb, and even Boris Johnson, the politician that prides himself on being able to do things others can't, I just can't see him getting out of this hole now. The Chief Whip is in there just now, and he'll be discussing with the Prime Minister what to do. The plan first thing this morning was to try a reshuffle, to try and put new ministers into new positions. But they can't do it because so many jobs are becoming vacant, literally as we're on air, literally as they are in there trying to fill jobs, more ministers are resigning. I think it's impossible now for Boris Johnson to rebuild that cabinet. He has whole departments. The Department for Education has no ministers left in it. There is barely a functioning government. And for that reason, I cannot see how Boris Johnson survives the next few days.
So if we look for a moment at Nadeem Zahawi, who just in the last, 10 minutes or so, tweeted his comments. Now, only yesterday, he was speaking to the press saying that Boris Johnson was the man, that he had his support.
Literally this time yesterday, Nadeem Zahawi was out batting for the PM.
And I suppose, in a way, that is the clearest possible illustration of the extremes of the situation Boris Johnson is in now.
It's really extraordinary. We've felt over the past 3 days his power just being slowly sapped, all authority in that building going. And it feels to me like Nadeem Zahawi's letter this morning and the resignation of the Education Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, they're the final nails in the coffin. Nadeem Zahawi's letter, as you pointed out, Charlie, to me a few minutes ago, isn't addressed to the Prime Minister. It's a public letter. He talks about, he does say at the end of it, Prime Minister, you know in your heart what the right thing to do is, and go now. But throughout it, he's talking about making it clear to the Prime Minister, alongside colleagues, alongside my colleagues number 10, that there was only one direction this was going. This is what Nadeem Zahawi says he told the Prime Minister yesterday, and that he should leave with dignity. The reason I stumbled there is, as this all happens, the blame game's starting. I've got a text from someone who was in government until a few days ago saying that Nadeem Zahawi was the one that kept the Prime Minister in power yesterday, but only for 24 hours. I mean, it just feels like the most extraordinary situation we're in. There's two things, Charlie. It's not just now the damage that this is doing to the Prime Minister. Tory MPs are telling me it's the damage it's doing to their party.
Stay with us for a moment, Nick. Thank you very much. Time now, you watch your breakfast, is 8:59. Let's just pick up, Nick, exactly where we were. So, we have these messages, we have these resignations. In practical terms, what happens here? I mean, what happens next?
I mean, look, that is one of the few things that's unclear, is what Boris Johnson is going to do. My hunch is that, given what's just happened with the Chancellor and the Education Secretary both telling the Prime Minister to go, Boris Johnson probably will conclude now that he can't continue. But we can't be certain of that because he's not a normal Prime Minister. Most Prime Ministers would have gone yesterday, so I don't know what he'll do. Had radio silence from number 10 all morning, which suggests to me they're weighing up their options. But if he doesn't go, I think it's pretty certain now that his party will act against him.
Can I just clarify a couple of things? Because we've heard different voices from senior Conservatives this morning. Some saying the normal course of things is Prime Minister resigns but stays in office until the replacement is found. But other very senior voices in the Conservative Party say, given what's been said and the circumstance, that would not be the right thing. So how does that work?
Look, I think that's totally right. Look, when Theresa May stood down, she stayed as Prime Minister to allow a transition period to find someone new. Same with David Cameron. In fact, same with the vast majority of Prime Ministers. I think that's incredibly difficult to see here. There was talk yesterday in Parliament from Tory MPs who are well connected that Dominic Raab would be an acting Prime Minister. Remember that he did that when Boris Johnson was in hospital. Dominic Raab is the Deputy Prime Minister. There's no constitutional answer to that question, but that was the expectation politically yesterday. It's worth pointing out that Dominic Raab is still one of the few people loyal to the Prime Minister in the Cabinet.
And we've heard nothing from him. So there may be people watching this morning, just join breakfast, who are sort of thinking, really, is it the situation that extreme? You came to me just a moment ago and said, we really have to start thinking about things differently now. The momentum has significantly changed today, in the last 20 minutes, half an hour?
The biggest problem Boris Johnson's got is that it's got worse every hour since the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, resigned. It got worse yesterday. It's got worse again this morning. There isn't at the moment a functioning government because of the number of ministers who walked out. There are departments like education that have nobody at ministerial level left in them. I find it impossible to see at the moment how Boris Johnson can turn this around. Look, Nobody knows for sure what he's going to do. Maybe he will try and cling on over the weekend. But it feels to me like the rot was set yesterday and it's just got worse and worse and worse. And I really struggle to see at the moment how this lasts more than 2 or 3 days.
And what we know from what he said, of course, is precisely that he will remain. That, you know, depending on whose exact quotes you take on board, that he will have to be dragged screaming and kicking out of this place, number 10 Downing Street. But there has been no sense at any point in this process that suggests that he will step outside and say, time is up.
Look, Charlie, by the time that we're back on air tomorrow morning, that may well have changed. You know, the events this morning are so dramatic that they add to the drama of yesterday, they add to this wide expectation around Westminster now that there's nothing the Prime Minister can do but soldier on, and that he will have to either resign today or tomorrow, or he'll be forced out by his party next week.
And one of the other things that I know you've been watching very closely and your contacts, there are almost no supporting voices to be heard. I mean, as you say, some are supporting him by their silence, effectively, like of Dominic Raab, who have not spoken against him. But there are no voices supporting.
Well, I mean, that's the problem. There's no one out this morning saying that sort of thing. I'm just going to pull up my phone here because I've got another one. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has said in the last few seconds, oh no, that tweet's been deleted. Someone had sent me a tweet from Ben Wallace that now seems to have gone. Let's see if we can get that back up in a second. Regardless of what Ben Wallace said in that tweet that we can't get now, the mood has changed completely in the past 48 hours. It's got worse and worse and worse and worse. And that just says to me that whatever Boris Johnson is hoping in there has been overtaken by events.
Sometimes, and you're happy to stay for a moment or two. I know.
Sorry, I've got this Ben Wallace message back up again. I wonder if he had a typo or something in it. That's what I normally do when I have a problem with messages. 2 seconds, Charlie, because as I say that, my wife.
So Ben Wallace, and again, this is a very significant voice, isn't it?
Defence Secretary was in that building yesterday while we were on air on breakfast. He says a number of us have an obligation to keep this country safe, no matter who is Prime Minister. The party has a mechanism to change leaders, and that is the mechanism which I advise colleagues to use. In the meantime, the public would not forgive us if we left these offices of state empty. What's he saying? I'm not resigning, but Boris Johnson's time's up. The party needs to do it.
Just one thing, and I know colour sometimes helps in these things. You were recounting to me a story that you witnessed yesterday, which was after Boris Johnson's appearance in front of the liaison committee, and they walk out and you and other reporters are close by.
Yeah, so Boris Johnson was in, it was the most remarkable situation yesterday where Boris Johnson was in the liaison committee. We were all watching him answer questions about specific policy, all the while his government was crumbling around him. His allies were telling me downstairs, literally 20 metres away from where the Prime Minister was, that his time was up. It was just a question of when he was going to go, the mechanism that would be used. When Boris Johnson came out, for about 20 seconds, he was glued to his phone. It's not clear that he knew, while he was in the liaison committee, what was going on. And a young member of staff, a Conservative member of staff, shouted at him in Parliament, resign. He ploughed on to his car, came back here. Ever since, he's been holed up in there trying to figure out what next. But I think what next is increasingly being taken out of his hands.
Thanks so much, Nick. We await developments. We're live at Downing Street this morning. More in just a moment. Let's take a brief look now. Headlines where you are. Good morning, welcome back to Downing Street. We're trying to pick up on an enormous amount of information coming out to us this morning, a number of resignations you'll be aware throughout the morning. Let's speak now to Chris Philp, the former technology minister who has resigned. Very good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning. Mr. Philp, what was the final reason that you decided to resign?
Well, I think it was very clear that Boris Johnson had lost the confidence of the public and of the parliamentary party, and his position was unsustainable. I also felt that it's become increasingly apparent in recent weeks and recent days there are issues with integrity which I found it impossible to overlook any longer. So taking all of those things together, I didn't feel it was right that he should carry on as Prime Minister, and therefore, of course, I had to resign as a minister in his government, which I did.
Chris Philp, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm going to cut you short. I just want to bring in Nick now because we're getting more information. Just bring us right up to date, Nick.
Yeah, just through from my colleague Chris Mason, our political editor, that the expectation is now that Boris Johnson will resign today. That power has been sapped from him in a way that it's impossible for him to continue, and that in the next few hours we will hear Boris Johnson say that time is up. It seems like the message from the Chancellor, the new Chancellor, that they had to go, the resignation of ministers that were put into office just within the last few hours, that has been enough to tip the balance. And the expectation now, according to my excellent colleague Chris Mason, is that the Prime Minister will be gone now.
Okay, so this is based from the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. His information is that the resignation will happen today, because this was the speculation that would it be today, would it be dragging into next week? But it seems clear that the sequence of events this morning, with some very, very significant interventions, literally in the last 15 or 20 minutes, has changed things once again.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, exactly that. The situation has evolved in a way over the last few hours that Boris Johnson, who last night was planning to cling on to power, had planned some sort of reshuffle today to try and get his leadership back on track, that has now been pushed over the edge, that he's decided he can't go on, and the expectation now is that he's going to resign.
Okay, Nick, if you step to just one side there. Thank you very much. Sorry about the mechanics dinner. I'll get two guests in, if we may, just very briefly. Anna Isaac from The Independent, Sebastian Payne from the Financial Times. I don't know if you just heard what we were saying there. I'm not sure what information you've heard along the same lines.
Yes, I've been told by two government insiders that Boris Johnson is going to resign as Prime Minister following that slew of cabinet resignations this morning. And I think we saw a tweet coming out from Ben Wallace, who's been one of the most ardent defenders of Boris Johnson over the past week, and he said he will not quit because he needs to keep running the Ministry of Defence, but he urged colleagues to use the mechanism to remove him. We saw the new Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, who's been in the job 48 hours, also urging the Prime Minister to go. So I think after a very traumatic couple of days in Westminster, they finally realised that behind that black door, it's up, it's over.
Anna, pick up on that.
I'm being told that the letter's being written as we speak. It's fair to say that as far as the officials inside go, they expect him to leave today. That's what I've been told. I think it's become a sort of a masterclass in sadomasochism the past few days. You know, how many punches will it take? Is he going to fight to the death has been the narrative. And I think Zahawi and Wallace did make that impossible this morning, particularly Ben Wallace using the terms that he did. It was a very damning message saying, you know, something must be done, but we do need continuity in this country. And that really speaks to a sense in the Tory party that their job is to offer stable government. It is to be that continuity, that safety for the country. And so I think speaking to the party faithful, the grassroots, the way Ben Wallace can, in that way, it was a very powerful killer blow.
Sebastian, so this is all, I mean, literally, for those people just joining us, this is literally in the last few moments that the tide very much has turned, and all those, including yourselves, political correspondents, are being told the decision has been made. He is to resign. Do you know anything about the mechanics of this?
These are all questions we're going to have to find out when we hear from the Prime Minister at some point today. Because, first of all, is he actually going to remain Prime Minister during an interim period when the Conservative Party chooses a new leader? Now, obviously, when Theresa May decided to resign and David Cameron, they stayed in Downing Street until the party got a new leader. We don't know if Boris Johnson will do that. If he does stay in Downing Street, then there's going to need to be some ministerial appointments, because we've got no Northern Ireland Secretary, no Education Secretary, no Welsh Secretary, as well as all those 50 other government appointments as well. It could be that if he does walk straight away, there could be an interim Prime Minister. Dominic Raab, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, would be the obvious person, and they could have a temporary government to try and fill those slots. The next thing, of course, is the process for selecting a new Conservative Party leader. The way it normally works is you have a period where MPs whittle down to the final 2 candidates, and then it goes out to the country for a much bigger vote. I think given the gravity of this situation, of course, the economic crisis, the war in Ukraine, and all the turbulence of the past couple of days, I think there'll be huge pressure on Tory MPs just to decide themselves and not put it out to the country. But of course, if you do that, that means they don't necessarily have a mandate from grassroots activists. So the Tory party in that 1922 committee of backbenchers have some really big questions they have to try and answer. But at the moment, it's a very fast-moving picture.
It is, and I mean, I'm very mindful there'll be people coming to their TV screens this morning who didn't know quite where we're at, and it's changed in the last 10 minutes or so that we understand at this point that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is to resign. As you're saying, we don't know the mechanics of how that will happen, but it has changed so quickly, literally in the last few minutes. But between the time that we last heard from Boris Johnson, when he was in the Commons, in front of the liaison committee, still with that bullish "I will remain," and now we are in a very different place.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've gone in the last few hours from is an emphasis on the mandate from the electorate that Boris Johnson had. He was saying, I won this huge election victory. That's a huge number of people voting for me to govern. I've been given a job to do. The country faces multiple crises at home with the cost of living, the geopolitical situation with Russia. And he was saying, you know, I've got to stay and do the job. What's happened now is we've reached a point where doing that job has been called into question. So absolutely, it's not sustainable for him to continue. We've had this steady hemorrhaging of staff at all levels in terms of people serving as eyes and ears for the various ministers, but now to the ministers themselves saying someone needs to be continuity for this country right now. But bear in mind that if I had any other option other than to leave an incredibly important role, I would be resigning. And Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who's incredibly popular among the party because he's seen as a very safe pair of hands, you know, the exact epitome of your perfect Tory, as it were, him saying, I have to stay in office, but it's your job to get him out, has just dealt a killer blow. I think it's
Sebastian, just pick up on that, because we have the daughter number 10 behind us there. People will remember very vividly that resignation moments in the past, you know, a podium out here. We just don't know, do we? We don't know.
Well, I imagine Boris Johnson will do a statement. You'd imagine that podium will come out behind the black door at some point today. And I think Boris Johnson will be focused on what he sees as his achievements. He will talk about getting Brexit done, defeating Jeremy Corbyn, the war in Ukraine, and the vaccine rollout. And he will essentially say what I think has been very clear for the past couple of days, that he's lost the confidence of his party, of his colleagues, of his cabinet, and that it's time for him to go and move on. But as I said, you know, it's been a pretty unedifying 48 hours, I think, for British politics and the Conservative Party. It was clear yesterday morning that he did not have the confidence of the party anymore. And I think the killer blow when we look back on this will be the sacking of Michael Gove very late last night, a very popular cabinet minister within the Conservative Party, the man who was meant to be doing the levelling up agenda, the raison d'etre of Boris Johnson's government, and the fact that he was abruptly sacked and was described as a disloyal snake by people in Downing Street. I think that's when MPs said, that's it, we've had enough.
Sebastian, Anna, thank you both very much. We watch with interest. Thank you for your insight this morning. So if you're just joining us and you've been following events this morning, very important information to bring to you. The BBC now understands that Boris Johnson will resign later today. John Maguire is on College Green this morning. John, tell us about any reaction you're hearing.
Very early days, of course. People are just hearing that news. It's shocked but not surprised, isn't it? It's one of those situations, really. Just talking to a couple of people as they're drifting around. We are going to be talking to Steve Baker, MP, in a few minutes' time, by the way, so we'll get his reaction first. One of the main drivers of the Brexit campaign, of course, so he'll be very interesting to hear from. So we had expected things, I don't know, maybe we expected them yesterday, but the people that we've been talking to this morning, to Matt Hancock, to Tim Lawton, when they haven't been talking to you and I, Charlie, they've been absolutely glued to their phones, not only because of all of those other resignations from other ministers, not only from the Cabinet, but other junior ministers as well have been coming through thick and fast. But you think of a situation like Michelle Donlan really only in a post for, what, 24 hours, 48 hours, something like that, a revolving door of ministerial appointments. So a sense really of a fast-moving situation. I mentioned Robert Buckland just before he spoke to you, Charlie. I said, when do you think things will come to a head? He looked up to the skies, did an eye roll, and then said, well, hopefully in the next hour. It should all happen now. But it certainly seems as if the information that we're getting at the moment, Mr. Johnson's resignation is imminent. And as I say, perhaps shock but not surprise. The numbers, I suppose, it turned out to be a numbers game, really, with so many members of the government leaving, and that situation where is the government then hamstrung? Are we in a situation where the government is no longer effective, it can no longer function? Is it damaging brand UK around the world? As I say, we are surrounded by international broadcasters here this morning who will be sending this message, depicting this chaos, what's happening where you are in Downing Street, just up the road, but indeed in the Commons behind me, sending that message around the world. It's not a good one. It's unedifying, of course, and it seems as if the Prime Minister has finally made the decision that it's time for him to go.
John, thank you very much. We're live here at Downing Street. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is inside Downing Street this morning, and the BBC now understands that the Prime Minister is to resign. We understand he is writing his letter of resignation now. We don't know how, in practice, this will play out, whether he'll be bringing a podium outside number 10 here at some point in the next few hours, but it has been confirmed by the BBC that Boris Johnson is to resign. It follows during the course of this morning an extraordinary sequence of events. You'll be aware of the number of resignations, and then there were this morning, in the last half hour, 40 minutes, a number of very specific and very significant interventions. If we start with Nadhim Zahawi, who of course is the newly appointed Chancellor, what was that, 48 hours ago, he tweeted that it was time for Boris Johnson to resign. He himself, the Chancellor, did not resign. And then we had Michelle Donlan, another of the new appointments. These appointments only made yesterday, who is the new Education Secretary, who has herself resigned. And these series of events, these resignations, were seen very much as the end of the game. What we'd heard from the Prime Minister previously was that he was determined to fight on to the very end, no matter what the circumstances were. And we knew that had it gone into next week, the Conservative Party would have taken measures for another vote of confidence. All that would now appear academic. What we know now is that the Prime Minister will be resigning. In terms of the timetable, there is no information at this stage officially from Downing Street, but we await to hear what form that will take. We would expect some form of letter initially, and then presumably a moment in time in which Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, will announce his resignation. You will be well aware that it's been a period of days now where the numbers of voices from senior members of his own government have been heard louder and louder. John Maguire is just down the road at College Green here. John?
Yeah, Charlie, we spoke to Robert Buckland, former Lord Chancellor, earlier on in the programme, and I was just talking about the fact that we had said off-air before the interview, how long is this going to take? You rolled your eyes skyward and said hopefully within the hour. You weren't far off.
Well, no, it's done now, and I think the Prime Minister's done the right thing, the honourable thing, and decided to tender his resignation. It was inevitable in these sad circumstances, but what we've got to make sure is that what he was elected to do, the One Nation programme of government, to bring the country together, to level up, in his famous words, continues. The government is a big organisation. It involves many members of Parliament and civil servants. We need to get on with that work, and we need a leader who embodies those One Nation principles, somebody with experience of government, somebody who knows the challenges, who knows how to deal with government, but who also respects our constitution and the rule of law. I'm looking for a leader who believes in what Margaret Thatcher called freedom under the law, and that's going to be the choice for the Conservative Party in the weeks ahead.
What do you think will have made his mind up? What will have been the straw that broke the camel's back, as we've been saying?
I think inevitably it's going to be the views of colleagues, and in particular members of Cabinet and ministers who had voted with their feet this morning with some very strong letters of resignation. I don't think anybody could have withstood that particular barrage, and he's bowed to the inevitable, and I now hope that in the manner of his departure we will be able to reflect on what he did actually achieve, which was to unbreak the logjam of Brexit, deal with the unprecedented challenge of COVID, and steward the country through 3 tumultuous years.
OK, do you have a name in mind for his successor?
Well, I think it's more important than names. I want the party to come together around values, and it's those One Nation values of freedom under the law which we need to get back to, and get back to quickly.
Get back to work. Thank you very much, Robert Buckland. Charlie, that's the very latest. We'll get more reaction for you from the Green, but for now, back to you.
John, thank you very much. Just one line for you. Keir Starmer has commented already, who has said it is good news for the country that Boris Johnson is no longer Prime Minister. Should have happened long ago. Nick Eardley has been with me alongside me this morning, throughout the morning. Just talk us through what happens next in terms of logistics. What can we expect?
We will hear from the Prime Minister at some point today announcing that he intends to resign. He doesn't intend to go right away. He wants to wait until the autumn to give the Conservative Party the chance to elect a new leader. Some questions, I suspect, over whether his party will let him do that, such as the anger at the way the last few days have been handled. But Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is over. Over the next few hours, the next few days, we're going to start talking about who the next Prime Minister is. I suspect there'll be a lot of Conservative MPs who this morning will be teeing up their leadership bids. That process will kick off this afternoon. It's going to be all changing here within weeks.
Nick, thank you for your company this morning. That's all from BBC Breakfast.